Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for our virtual Rebel Recharge lecture. I'm Gabrielle Engel, a proud 2010 Boyd School of Law alumna and your UNLV Alumni Association president. It is my honor to personally welcome each of you here today. I would also like to give a special welcome and thanks to Blake Douglas, Associate Vice President for Alumni Engagement and Executive Director of the UNLV Alumni Association, Renee Rivera-Gelfi, Coordinator for Programs and Events, for producing today's virtual lecture, and Missy Arendash, Associate Director for Programs and Events. We have a great lineup of engaging events coming up this fall, and we hope to see you there. You can see our full schedule of events at engage.unlv.edu/events. Our goal is to continue to grow our programs and events and create fun, educational, and engaging opportunities for our alumni, faculty, staff, students, and community members. Today's discussion is entitled Back from the Brink, Productively Navigating Group Conflicts, presented by Dr. David G. Schwartz. Dr. Schwartz is a professor, gaming historian, and ombuds at UNLV. He studies gambling and casinos, video games, popular culture, Las Vegas, tourism, and conflict resolution. He has also written several books, including At the Sands, the casino that shaped classic Las Vegas, brought the Rat Pack together, and went out with a bang. Please join me in welcoming David.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen now. And there we go. You should be seeing a PowerPoint presentation. Awesome. So we see the crowd of people here up at the top there. They're at the Brink. And in the next hour or so, we're going to talk about navigating away from that Brink, getting away from that Brink and group conflicts. So what we're going to do today is talk about why conflict happens in a group. How does it escalate? And then how can conflicts inside groups be more productively resolved? And we'll have plenty of time. We'll have some quizzes. We'll have also time for interaction in the chat. I've got the chat window open here, so I'll see anything anybody puts in the chat. So I want to start it with a little bit of a discussion about why does conflict happen? So in general, it's natural for people to disagree. But when people lose trust in each other, that's when they escalate the next level. And I see this a lot of times in my role as ombuds, where people have an agreement, and we'll talk about how to resolve it. And I'll say, yeah, but if you could have, you're here because you can't talk with each other, and that's a bigger problem. And yeah, we can help resolve this one thing, but you've got to build on that base. So that's it. And also, when people don't communicate well, a small misunderstanding, which happen every day, can really get out of control. So where does conflict happen? And when you find yourself in conflict, think about what kind of conflict it is. First, there's intrapersonal. This is conflict within one person. So it's just when you're not sure which way to go about something, and you're having a conflict, but it's only with you. There's also interpersonal conflict, where it's between two people. That's probably the most common that I see. And I'd like to tell people when they visit me as ombuds, anything intrapersonal, I am not trained to help with. That would probably be better for a therapist or counselor. But interpersonal, that's what I do. There's also group conflict, which we're talking about today. Institutional conflict, so this is across the whole organization. Community, and this is at a bigger level. And then finally, society. And we see these playing out in politics all the time. So a lot of different conflicts. So I have a little quick quiz question for you. Which kind of conflict do you think is hardest to resolve? Okay, people leaning heavily towards society. So I'd like to know if you can just talk in the chat with each other, with all of us, just why do people think that social conflicts are harder to solve than interpersonal or group conflicts? What do people think? Why are they so hard to resolve? Or you can just, if you're allowed to, you can just come on voice. I'm not sure if that's accessible for everybody. Okay, power. Roberta says power, military might, misinformation. Darren says scale. Yeah, it's hard to get. I mean, even among two people you have disagreements, it's hard to get millions of people to agree. Groupthink and misinformation. Yeah, these things all compound, so it makes it a lot more difficult. So by the time a conflict is at the social level, it's not easy to solve, not easy to resolve. Okay, we'll move on. Thank you for the quiz. So what are the drivers of conflicts? What pushes people in the, oh, we have one more from Jim. Positions and emotions harden with help from others. Yes, and we're going to see that in the groups. So drivers of conflicts. Christopher Moore, who studies conflict resolution, has created a model for conflict saying there's 5 basic drivers for conflict, 5 things that push people into conflict. Number 1, history and relationships. Number 2 is going to be values, and that's a big one. History and relationships basically is when something bad happens in the past, that tends to compound. So you had a bad interaction with somebody once, you approach them, you're a little bit standoffish, they react, and things just get worse. That's the history. Values is when you don't agree about major things. So for example, at UNLV, a values conflict could be one person says the goal of the university is to have access to have as many people as possible, get an education here. Another person could say, no, the goal of the university is to be very selective and try to have fewer people come in, but have higher achievements. That would be a values conflict. You also have externals, so conflicts that are driven by external factors. So if somebody is having trouble at home, or if somebody's having health issues, they may come in, they may just be in a bad mood, they can come in and get into a conflict with their coworkers, and it's nothing that anybody did, it's just, but this is still an important part of the conflict. Now we get to the fun ones. These are my 2 favorite conflict drivers because these are the ones that you can actually do something about without too much, well, it's heavy lifting, but without too much heavy lifting. First one is data. Data is when 2 people know different things or they don't agree in the interpretation. And my favorite example of this has actually happened to me this morning at drop-off at middle school. Imagine you are the second car at the intersection in the right lane, rightmost lane. And you want to make a right-hand turn and there's no traffic coming and you don't understand why is a driver in front of me not turning. And just as you're about to lay on that horn and give him a piece of your mind, you see a pedestrian in the crosswalk. That was a data conflict. The driver in front of you could see the pedestrian, you could not. So you thought that they were just not paying attention. And then if you actually laid on the horn, they would say, well, this person is heartless, they want me to run somebody over. So that's when you don't agree, you don't have the same data. And the key to resolving that conflict, as I saw this morning, was getting access to the data, seeing the pedestrian. So data conflicts are relatively easy to resolve compared to values or history. Structure is another one that is difficult, but it's a little bit less emotional. Structure is when you don't have enough resources or it's not clear who reports to who. And we see these a lot. And sometimes, a lot of times when I'm working with parties trying to figure out the conflict, on the surface, it will appear to be a structure problem. But when we get down to it, it turns out to be a history one or a values one. And we need to do more work. So those are the drivers of conflict. So that's one thing to be aware. In groups, these are the things that are driving it. Also, we have our interests. Our interests are what we want. And it's different from a position. A position would be, I want a $4,000 a year raise. An interest would be, I want to be more financially secure, or I want to feel appreciated and recognized. So the position is kind of the hard negotiating point. The interest is the underlying one. And Harvard Negotiation Project and a lot of other negotiation experts really do stress the benefits of doing interest-based negotiation rather than position-based. Okay, so to resolve conflicts, once you know what kind of conflict it is, the key is to go to the bottom of the circle. And don't worry, I'm going to give you a PDF handout at the end that'll have all this stuff on it. So basically, if somebody is in a bad mood and there's no way to, if they're having trouble at home and you can't address that situation and they're complaining about something, try to switch it to data and structure or talking about their interests. And it's kind of amazing because a lot of times I will have people come to the office and they have very strong feelings about conflict, and I'll just ask them, well, what would make you happy? If you had a magic wand, what would you have happen? And many times they don't know. They're like, I don't know. And usually I'll suggest, well, if you don't think about that, you're probably not going to be able to get a good resolution and feel better because you're not sure what you want. So a lot of times you can say, well, what would make you happy? Probably not knowing. That may sound like it would be, it's all about tone. If I say, well, what would make you happy? That's not really conducive. If I'm like, well, if you had a magic wand, what would you want to have happen next? That could work. Also the data, share the information, also talk about more resources or changing reporting. That'll work. Okay, so quiz question for you. Do you think, now some people who negotiate or some people who get into conflicts like to say, well, I don't want to tell them what's really driving me. I want to keep that to myself. Who thinks that's a good idea? We have a quiz here. Who thinks that's a good idea? Should parties openly share their interests with the other side, which would be yes, or should they keep it to themselves, which would be no? Wow, yes there's some no votes, but yes is winning strongly. And I'd like to hear in the chat, feel free to put in the chat, why you feel the way you do, because there's always different ways to approach things. And does anyone think there's any risks in giving your interests? So I'll give you a second. So yes. Does anyone think there's any risks? Is there any downside to telling people, well, this is what's driving me? I don't feel appreciated. So yeah, it's transparent. I like what Rebecca says. Trust is important. And there's a measure of vulnerability. If I just come in to my boss and say, well, I deserve $4,000 more a year. I'm just telling them what I want. If I say, I need to feel more appreciated here, or I need to feel more financially secure, I'm being vulnerable. And he can say, what do you mean you don't feel appreciated? You don't think I appreciate you? So that's, again, as Reggie said, that's a risk. But again, if you don't have that kind, Roberta says you don't have to share everything, but he keeps the door open. And Alicia says, yes, allows for connection. I mean, basically, it is a risk. It is vulnerability when you do this. You have to open yourself up. But a lot of people would say that is something that would be good. And I like what Jim says, if your risks conflict with if your interests conflict with the other person's interests, you could shut it down. Although most times they don't. If somebody says, I want to be more appreciated, not too many supervisors will say, well, I think I appreciate you too much. Most of the times the reaction, at least the public one, will be, oh, naturally I appreciate you. What else can I do to help you feel that way? That would be there. But it's interesting. Another thing, I'll just kind of throw this as an aside, another thing I've seen is that basically it's not good to be afraid if I say something, somebody will turn it against me, because if somebody wants to, they can turn anything you say against you. Even if you say, I appreciate you so much, I want you to tell me what would make you feel more appreciated. They could say, well, how come you don't know how to make me feel more appreciated? You must not know me very well. And again, if you go down that route, somebody going down that route is not going to be happy with anything you say. So you just have to, again, maybe switch to, well, is there something you need to know? Can we change a structure here? So moving around the circle there. Okay, we're done section 1, we're into section 2. Group conflict, how does it escalate? We see this group conflict picture. Doesn't look good. Okay, so the escalation of group conflicts, there's basically 5 different factors that cause these to escalate. I'm going to list them here, then I have a slide for each of them. So they are prior histories, and these somewhat correlate with the drivers, but they're a little bit different. Bad communication, peer pressure, escalating language, and hooked on the drama. Everybody loves number 5, hooked on the drama. People like that. Okay, so prior histories. So remember that relationships driver, the history driver. So take that. It's kind of like a math problem, you know, R times G, which is relationships time group. So you have people basically, okay, you don't like this person, I don't like that person either, we can be friends, or you like that person, I don't like that person, we're now enemies, you're against me. You know, I have people come to me in the office as ombuds and say, well, you know, when I got hired, I was told I'd have to pick a side. There's 2 sides fighting in my office, I have to pick one. So some people, you know, that happens a lot. We see this in the international level, you know, well, our country's invading this country. Well, if you condemn that, you're now our enemy. If you back that country, you're against us. So basically that really makes things bad, the group dynamics. Bad communication too. And this is kind of the data driver, but I want to be a little bit more precise about it. There's 2 things here. There's lack of communication and there's poor communication. So sometimes people really don't have any conflict with each other. They're just not talking to each other, so they invent one. Danny Thomas, the comedian, did a really good, he did a really good stand-up bit where he would be, again, I probably have this kind of muddled, and it is about 7 years old at this point, but a guy's car broke down. He went to walk to a service station to get a jack to repair it. In his head, he's playing this conversation. What if they say no? What if they do this? He gets there and he starts screaming at the person behind the counter, like, I don't even want your repair jack. And he basically was just escalating himself, all this in his head. Another really good example of this is in the movie Swingers, the very famous answering machine scene where Mikey gets a number of a woman, he calls her in the answering machine, and he's leaving a series of messages and basically just gets himself so riled up. It's one of the best scenes ever. You know, look it up on YouTube after we're done here, just, you know, Swingers answering machine scene. It's a legend. It's great acting because basically it's just him in his apartment and he's just bouncing off himself. And that happens when people don't communicate, you know, and Reggie agrees. Silence, yes, it makes the imagination active. You know, again, a lot of times people, he thinks this and this and this. Well, did they say that? No. Well, how do you know? Well, I don't know. Also, poor communication. That makes people feel worse. And a lot of times, like I said, I see cases where you're on the same page. There is no real disagreement here, but the way people are talking to each other makes them not want to agree. You know, and this is the data driver, but a little bit more precise. Okay, next one is peer pressure. People like to fit in. It's very important. People, oh my God, you know, you know, is anyone else wearing a lapel pin? Am I the only one? You know, so people like to fit in. And if everyone else is bad in your office, you get mad too. Why not? You don't want to be the one who's not mad. And a lot of times it's fun for people in groups to find either an internal person or an external person to unite against. And I think we saw this in The Office, that sitcom. We saw this quite a few times. So basically they need somebody to have as the enemy. So that's peer pressure. Escalating language is another. When you're uncivil to somebody or incivil, it's incivility, but the adjective is uncivil. I don't get that. So incivility, people will be more incivil. So if you scoff at somebody, call them Mrs. instead of doctor when they have a PhD, they will probably return in kind. Profanity usually yields more profanity. You know, oh, do that to me, I'll do that to you. You know, so that usually is a key to escalate. It's rare when somebody drops an F-bomb in a conversation that suddenly things get more polite. I don't think we've ever seen that. Okay, threats yield counter threats. Oh, you're going to go to the dean, I'm going to go to the provost, I'm going to go to the president, well, I'm going to go to the chancellor. That happens. And basically that kind of escalation in language makes it harder to come together. And again, there's no movement on the underlying conflict. People are just using language to get escalated. And this is very bad in groups. Finally, this is my favorite one for groups. Hooked on the drama. Some people really love drama. They love people fighting. They love people disagreeing. They just thrive on that. They thrive on gossip. They thrive on being the person who knows. And they'll take little disagreements and really make them big. And like, hey, you're going to take that from him. And for some reason, I'm thinking like a bar fight. Like, you're going to let him talk to you that way? You got to stand up for yourself. What? You could take him. That's where the beer muscles come into play. So what if he's 6'5"? He'll go down easy. Everybody's got a jaw. You could take him. You're a legend. Okay, so they gossip. My favorite example of this from classical literature, Eris, the goddess of discord, was not invited to a wedding because people knew she would start problems. So to get her revenge, she shows up at the wedding and has an apple on which is said, and my Greek pronunciation is going to be bad here, but te kaliste, which I believe is ancient Greek for the most beautiful or for the fairest, and throws it. 3 goddesses get into a fight. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite fight over it. And this ends up causing the Trojan War. So just because Eris wanted to have some drama at that wedding party, Trojan War and all that. So that's a great example. Eris was somebody who was hooked on the drama for sure. Okay, so my question for you, my quiz question is, which of the 5 factors do you see most in group conflicts? There's 5 of them. Which one is the most prevalent? Prior histories, bad communication, peer pressure, escalated language, or hooked on the drama. So a lot of communication, folks, so far. Peer pressure, we've got to fit in, but no one else is doing it. But mom, everybody else is wearing it. Why can't I wear it? Hooked on the dramas in there too, but communication. And this really does track. Communication is the #1 issue that people bring to the ombuds office. It's so yeah, about 2/3 are saying communication, and pretty even across the others. Yeah, I mean, bad communication in history, so bad communication, yeah. So again, what I'm seeing here is we'll probably do more things about communication and how to tell somebody something. You know, yeah, history does affect communication. It's like, well, did you tell the person how you feel? You need to tell the people how you feel. Okay, well, good, okay. Yes, all right, so a lot of communication. Okay, next up, the stages of conflict. So this comes from an Austrian economist and consultant named Friedrich Glassel, who says that conflict escalates in 9 stages. So we're going to walk through them. This is where the title Back from the Brink came from. 9 stages. And it shows how as the conflict progresses, even though the core of the argument remains the same, it gets exponentially more difficult to resolve the further it goes. Group dynamics are huge here. And it's 3 phases. Okay, so phase 1 is the win-win phase. At this phase, both people can walk away and win-win. So rising tensions is the first one. They're aware that there's issues, but they don't want to resolve. So, okay, I know we've got a problem, but I don't want to talk to you about it. If they both chose to talk, or if they went to an external third party like a mediator or a facilitator, they could resolve it here and both walk away better off than when they started. Stage 2 is when they debate. Now they start to argue with each other, but they still have this commitment to shared interests. So they know, okay, we're fighting, but we still value this office. We're not going to take it any further. Okay. And again, they can both say, I'm sorry, I said something. They can both walk away at this point. Stage 3 is actions, not words. Now they start to act independently and they're blocking the other party. So they're stopping the other party from doing what they want to do. So now they're starting kind of passively, I would call this passive aggressive action. Okay, now, and here they still could get together and say, look, let's talk, let's have a heart-to-heart. After this phase, you cannot resolve the conflict without some kind of outside resolution. So that's win-win. So now we go beyond win-win to lose-win. Okay, stage 4, here's where the groups come in. Now they are putting together coalition. A lot of times people don't care about what the original disagreement was about. They just want to win. And now's where they're pulling in other people saying, hey, are you going to let them get away with this? Look what she's saying. Look what he's saying. And now's where they start to retaliate. Well, you said this. Well, I'm going to say that. You made me look bad in front of the provost. I'm going to make you look bad in front of the president. Okay, stage 5, loss of face. So one party looks bad in public. They're publicly embarrassed. And now everybody has an opinion and they also have a side that's going to win or lose. And again, in here, You could still resolve it, but now you need an outside mediator or somebody above you to tell you how to resolve it. Stage 6 is threatening strategy. Now people are threatening each other, and they really do, things start to spin out of control at stage 6. And basically here, you could have one party win, but one party is going to lose. So one party was embarrassed, the other party gets what they want. Even if you do a facilitation, you could still do facilitation at this point. Even if you do, somebody's going to lose. So it's bad. Also you could go to a higher up and say, settle this, and they will settle it by saying, well, you're fired and you're on suspension. That's how they could settle it. So it's lose-win. Okay, phase 3, unfortunately, is lose-lose. Okay, stage 7, tactical strikes. Now they know, well, we can't win. We just want to hurt the other person. We just want to survive against the enemy. And if we're here one day longer than they are, we've won. Stage 8 is fragmenting the enemy. Now they're directly attacking the enemy. They're pulling out complaints. They're going public. And the only thing holding people back at this point is self-preservation. Like, well, if I do this, I could look bad, so I don't want to do it. Okay, then they get to stage 9. Together into the abyss. This is where Back from the Brink comes from. Basically, anyone seen Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan? Any Trekkies around? Rebecca says yes. Okay, so basically, and there's no spoilers, the movie's 40 years old, so I don't think I'm going to spoil anything. So Kirk had exiled Khan to this planet. The planet's climate shifted, the axis shifted. Khan's wife died, and Khan wanted revenge on Kirk. So for 15 years, he's plotting his revenge against Kirk. It escalates throughout the movie. Finally, Khan is going to detonate the Genesis device, and he doesn't care that it's going to kill him, but he knows he's going to get Kirk. So that is kind of that, and that's my best example of that. Also, if anyone's ever seen War of the Roses, that was a movie, again, of about that age, where it's the fighting. I think it's, oh my God, Kathleen Turner and Michael Douglas, or did I get that wrong? I know it's Michael Douglas, but basically they're spouses that are getting divorced, and the movie culminates in both of them being destroyed, and they don't care. They want to pull down the other person with them. And that's scary because they don't care who they take out. And you see that. And basically it's inevitable it's going to be lose-lose. And if somebody comes to my office in this phase, so Cassandra says, what phase would I place conflict where people are no longer speaking to each other? I would say that's probably phase 3. And I'm going to scroll back to phase 2. In phase 2, they're still maybe talking. So maybe after stage 5 or stage 6. I guess stage 6, they're still talking because they're issuing threats. But basically around here is where they're stopping to really communicate in any meaningful way. But by phase 3, they're not communicating. And they're like, I don't care. I don't care what they want. They need to go. Here it's, I don't care what they want. More, multiplied. Here it's, I don't care what they want. I don't care what it means to me, but they need to be punished for what they did. And I don't care if I get fired too. So I would say by phase 3, by stage 5 or 6 is when they stop talking directly. After stage 4, it's not going to be amicable when they talk. Up to stage 3, they're still talking. It could be relatively amicable. Okay, and lose-lose. And again, like at this phase, when people come to the office, there's no longer many options for a good resolution. I'm always trying to get, a multi-partial. I want to see both parties end up better when they came. At this phase, it's usually, okay, we're both getting fired. And then I shift into what I call the palliative ombudsing, where it's like, okay, you're not going to save your job. We're not going to heal this relationship with the other person. Can I help you write a cover letter to apply for your next job? Or, can I help you in the months when you're working remotely, how you're going to communicate with your supervisor? Basically, it's kind of like palliative care where you're no longer, the person can't be healed. You can just make their suffering less. And that does happen at some point, when people get to these stages. So it's not pleasant. So my question for you, have you ever seen a group conflict escalate to stage 9? Where both sides lose and they don't care? Have you personally seen a conflict? So we have yes and no are split right now. Yes is winning, no is coming back. This is fascinating watching. It's evening out. Yeah. It's scary. I mean, and it's actually, it's frightening for everybody, because when people have that kind of anger inside of them, they're really capable of anything. So you definitely want to get outside help long before you get to this phase, long before you get to it. And again, by that point, even if we got Friedrich Lassel himself to come in and try to mediate, he would probably look at everyone and say, you know, it's going to be lose-lose at this point. So you never want to get there. Okay. Yeah, all right, so it's kind of split. Okay, so 3, any questions about this, where we've been so far? And I know we're gonna have a lot of good time for questions at the end, which I like. And the one thing I love doing remote presentations, because you get to reach people in a different way. The one thing that is difficult for me sometimes is the lack of seeing people responding. So I can see a couple people on camera, which is good, just to see, hey, I'm not talking gibberish. You're always kind of afraid of that when you're doing something like this. Like, am I now just, because we see, I think recently this happened to a newscaster on air. They, I think, had a stroke or a mini stroke, and they just couldn't talk, and they were anchoring, and they're just, so you're always afraid, like, did something happen? Am I not speaking in sensible phrases? But I see it as, okay, no questions. Let's move on. So this is, how can they resolve group conflicts? Okay, so number 1, seeking resolution. 5 things you can do to resolve a group conflict if you catch it early enough. Okay, number 1, understanding it. And again, I've got slides for each of these, so I'm going to go through these. Number 2, seeking mutually beneficial resolutions. 3, solving the problems as individuals, not as groups. 4, getting outside help. 5, preparing to move on, which is harder and more rare than you think. Okay, so let's talk about these. Understanding the comment. Okay. Thank you, Jim. Okay. Understanding the conflict. So number 1, look for the drivers. Now that you know this, and you're going to have a PDF you can save or print it out, you can diagnose the conflict. Okay, and see, well, what are we really arguing about? Well, this is a data conflict, and I'm picking an easy one. Okay, I think I need to talk with this person about why I made this decision. And maybe they don't know all the reasons. Also, what are the group dynamics here? Yeah, I know these 2 people don't like each other, so they're going to jump on the chance to do that. And think critically about this stuff. Think critically about how all those things that exacerbate group conflict, you know, the histories, the bad communication, the peer pressure, and that drama, how they contribute. And with the drama, I mean, sometimes you have to level with the person and saying, look, you're making somebody's life miserable here. Go stream something on Netflix. You know, I don't even know. Anybody know what the latest show is with a lot of drama in it? You know, it was Succession. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't even keep up with that stuff. Stream something. Don't play with people's lives. Okay, mutually, that total drama. Yeah, mutually, that The Crown. Yes, The Crown for sure. I like that. Mutually beneficial resolutions instead of mutually assured destruction. Okay, so again, my interest, not my position. I want this, you know, I want this room for my next talk. I want to have this room. Or let's say for my next talk, I really want it to be in Google Meet. I don't want to use Zoom. That would be a position. My interest would be, well, in Google Meet, I have more access to breakout rooms or something. And I know that's not factually true. Queen of the South, there we go. I know it's not factually true, but you know, I'm just saying that would be, oh, well, no, Zoom actually has a breakout feature too. Okay, I'll use Zoom. That would help you. You know, also, again, like, what do you really want? And sometimes I level with people. I'm like, what is important with you? Do you want to emotionally hurt this person? And I'm like, you can tell me if you do. I'm not going to tell anybody, but be honest with yourself. You know, what do you want? Do you want a better parking space, or do you want to emotionally hurt this other person? Because if you want to emotionally hurt them, here's your options. If you want to have a better relationship, here's your options. And guess what? They're not the same. So what's more important here? I'm totally going into the stern ombuds mode here. And then what does the other side really want? So a lot of times when people are in conflict, especially in big groups, I'm like, well, why do you think they're doing this? Are they just cruel people? Are they worse than you? Are they evil people? Why are they doing it? What do they want? And a lot of times people say, well, yeah, maybe they do. Oh, I can see what they want now. That makes sense. Okay, so thinking about that, and is there any way to satisfy both sides? The allegory of this, it's kind of trite and overused, but the allegory of this that they teach you in mediation school is the siblings fighting over the orange. So there's a brother and sister and they're fighting over an orange. They both want the orange. And then the mother or the father splits the orange in half and gives them both halves, And this was not a good resolution. In fact, the brother wanted the orange zest to make an orange cake, and the sister wanted the pulp of the orange to juice it for orange juice. So they could have shared the orange together and they both would have been happy, but because they didn't communicate their interests, just their positions, they failed. And I wish all the conflicts people brought to me were that easy. You know, like the analogy I use, and this might be a bad one, is like, well, no, instead I have somebody with an orange. Their goal in life was that they wanted to run an orange through a wood chipper to see what would happen. And there's a wood chipper there that they said, like, this, I've been waiting all my life for this. Then I have someone else who is diabetic and needs to eat the orange to get their blood sugar up and is desperate for it, but can't have the orange. But the other person is convinced, no, this is my only chance to do this with the orange. And I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but a lot of times conflict don't, you know, so I wish every time people came here, it was that easy. Like, yeah, just you can use the skin, or the rind. Oranges have rind, not skin. Do they have skin? I don't know. Whatever an orange has, the peel. You have the peel, you have the insides, not always that easy. But look if there is. And a lot of times people have a lot more in common than they think, especially when we're working at a university, or if you're an alum, you know, you have a lot in common with the people you're with. Yeah, solve it as individuals. So don't negotiate as a group. Don't say, well, you have everybody. And the worst thing is when you're in a meeting room, everybody in this side, everybody in that side, like it's some kind of, you know, United Nations thing. Don't do that. Let everybody generate options and break up the seating. And hey, what do you think? What do you think? And basically get your list of options, then reality test it together, but talking as individuals, thinking, how do we help each other get through this problem? And again, like, is this person an enemy to be defeated or a partner to help me solve the problem? In some cases, it is an enemy to be defeated. You know, if somebody is in law enforcement and somebody is breaking the law, driving recklessly, yes, you know, you can't think collaboratively there. And what are your needs? You need to stop them from endangering themselves and other people. Most of us, though, aren't in those positions, so we can think collaboratively. How can we work together? Next one, fourth one, is getting outside help. A little bit kind of self-serving here because I'm the ombuds. So in the first phase, an outsider like the ombuds could help facilitate a discussion between two people as a neutral party. In the second phase, it's necessary they can mediate and sit them down and say, we're going to have a structured mediation here where you can talk about what you want. And basically, it can help the group come together if you do this. And we do a ton of group facilitation in the ombuds office. Tafara will probably nod, because we do a ton of this. We do a ton of this together. We've got 3 or 4 of them we're doing right now. Okay, so basically that helps. And it also helps to get help. Well, it's good to get help as early as possible. Don't let things get worse. Okay. Fifth and last one is preparing to move on. I have seen people who are defined by the conflict. And it gets hard, and it's first thing they think about when they wake up. It's the last thing they think about before they go to sleep. And it's difficult for them to think of themselves without this conflict defining them. And a lot of times they need to accept that the conflict can be over and that they can move on. A lot of times you'll have to accept, you know, I had a role in this. Maybe I didn't cause a problem, but I made it worse. And that's hard for a lot of people. You know, hey, maybe if I was nicer to this person when they first started working with me, they would have trusted me enough to come up to me privately instead of confronting me publicly. You know, you have to accept that. And also accepting, you know, it's okay, we're not going to fight anymore. And this is the hardest thing for a lot of people because, again, conflict has come to define them. And I see this all over, where they identify themselves as antagonists of someone else. And that only at this point can you really work for a resolution in good faith. But yeah, and that's a hard conversation for people to have. I had that conversation with the people quite a bit. Okay, so my quiz: how likely are you to use what you've learned in this today? How is this going to help anybody? Very, somewhat, possibly, or not at all? Okay, possibly. And I would love to, like, if anyone wants to know, if anybody wants to say, hey, there's more techniques we can use, email me, because I would love to. I have a lot I can share, so I'd love to share more. If we're not in very, email me and I will maybe do a future Rebel Recharge with some of these more techniques, because yeah. And again, and I would also say, like, the number one thing you can do in a conflict is to step back and be self-aware. I probably should have put that in there, just like, okay, I'm in a conflict. This is not the most important thing happening in the world right now. We have a war going on in Ukraine. We have climate change. We have social justice concerns. We have the Queen has just passed away. So there's a lot of very big things going on in the world. It's like, okay, this is not going to, it's not going to define everybody. How can we solve this? So that's an important one. Okay, so do you have questions? I would love some questions in the chat or some questions in voice questions if we're set up. Missy, are we set up for voice? We are set up for voice, so
Yes,
feel free to
we
unmute.
are.
Great. It'd just be nice to hear another voice. And also feel free to turn on your camera if you'd like. Good UNLV Today article. Yeah, it could be.
It looks like we have someone with their hand raised. If you want to come off mute, you're welcome to.
Okay. Hi, David. Thank you for this interesting conversation. And I'm going to look up Christopher Moore and Friedrich Glassel because I don't know a lot about them.
Yeah.
So my question is, when dealing when power dynamics make it very difficult to resolve conflicts. So if you're dealing, with staff and staff, or faculty and faculty, it's different than when you're dealing with faculty and students, or staff and students, where students have they have positions and interests, but sometimes the position is just like, I just want a room switch, and the housing office is not allowing this, and they're belittling me, and they're telling me that I this is not important, that I should have followed other policies and processes or whatever. And it just escalates and escalates, and other people come in. So I'm just saying that when power dynamics and become very tricky, what do you do? What kinds of suggestions or advice do you have?
There's a couple things, and I actually have a one-on-one conflict thing that includes power dynamics. First thing, and it's from both perspectives. So the power dynamics, when you're the person in charge, number one thing for either of them is be honest about it. Be like, hey, look, I'm just a student, or, I'm a contingent faculty member. I'm on a year-to-year contract. You're the chair. You have a lot of power. Name it. Do that. Also being aware of how power is limited. So even though a dean or a chair or a VP may seem to have limitless power in their domain, they're actually pretty limited in a lot of ways, and they're middle managers in a lot of ways, and their power is never absolute. So being aware of that, speaking about it, also looking at the alternatives, so if you do not have, if you have an issue with your chair, or if you're a student and you have an issue with the administration, what avenues are open to you to appeal it, and how can you best approach it with them, and how can you try to make it see, well, this will help other people. So it's a room switch thing, like, well, hey, was it just a room switch thing for one person, or is there a way, well, hey, look, we can improve the way we handle this process that will help everybody and make it less, again, it's going back to interests. And I would like to think, I would like to hope, I would like to imagine that everybody's interest here at UNLV, at least, is to have a good institution. So, okay, Cassandra, thank you. Thank you. So let's say it's a question of a particular policy or something. At the end of the day, that administrator wants a good UNLV. So if that policy is hurting people, they'll have to say, look, we need to change the policy. And one thing I will also throw in, Daniela, one thing that I really don't like to hear is people say nothing ever changes. We have leadership is changing all the time. We have constant changes in policy. 3 years ago, would we be working remotely as much? No. The university is evolving. It's different people than it was. The buildings are different from when I started 21 years ago. So when people say nothing ever changes, I'm like, well, no, things do change. You just need to make them change. You need to be invested. Okay. Rebecca's question is the big one. How do you manage conflict when there's a direct opposition in core values? Okay. Okay. Thank you, Daniela. There's 3 possibilities you can do. Number 1 is to sit down and try to persuade one side or the other to shift their values. You may not be surprised to hear this is not often very successful. So, that doesn't usually work. People are at a point where they're not going to listen to reason. They're in their position. Number 2 is to try to shift to another shared value. So again, with the example of that I had to begin where access versus excellence, although I would argue we can have both, but if people see them as opposed, both of those people believe in UNLV and making UNLV better is important. So I say, well, hey, let's shift from this argument to, well, how can we make UNLV better? So I call that the sort of distraction one. The last one is not a fun one, but is one, again, if I don't tell you this is a possibility, I'm lying to you, they can't work together, or one party is to move on. Like if it's that big of a deal, so for example, if somebody believes in their heart of hearts that it is my right to smoke in the workplace, they can no longer work at UNLV. There's just no way, because it's now the policy that smoking is forbidden on campus. They can't smoke here. So yeah, I mean, there's no room for negotiation there. So they would have to leave. And some conflicts where there's values conflicts, it gets to that point. I mean, we're seeing that now playing out in politics. And I don't want to get more specific. I don't want to be controversial, but we're seeing that play out in politics where, we accept the rule of law or we don't. And it's kind of hard to get back inside that house if you don't accept the rule of law. So yeah, that's my long-winded way of saying there's 3 ways. Share, kind of talk it out, then you agree in values, find a different shared value, redirect, or one person is to leave or they can't engage. Other questions? And I want to share here on the next slide. Actually, if we have a quick guide. So Missy, if you want to put this, Missy's put this in the chat. So you can download a quick PDF. I think it's 3-page PDF that just sums up a lot of what we talked about. And you will have that. Okay, and Stacy, and if you want to talk, if you want to come to the office and talk with me one-on-one, you can. This is, I don't know if it is. We could, I guess, that's a question for Tafara. We can throw it into the resources page. So we can put it in the resources page. So yes, it will be if it's not already. And feel free to share this too. It's a Google Doc and I want people to share it. So feel free to share it as you want. So yes, it is / will be. Okay, so Stacy, how do you get over the initial hump fear of engaging and addressing interpersonal conflict? 2 different schools of thought of this. One of them is if people have a huge fundamental underlying disagreement, like the history thing, like I'm mad that you did this. And I mean, there's people at this campus who were upset. Well, in my interview, you said this to me in my interview, and you tried to make me look bad when I interviewed for the job. And that was 10 years ago. And I mean, I have people with conflicts that started literally in 1984. So the question is, do you kind of go for the big one, like shoot in direct, like, hey, we've been enemies since day one, let's talk about this? Or do you say, well, there's this little thing we don't agree about. We'll see if we can agree there, and that builds. And a lot of that's going to be what your temperament is. Are you the kind of person who likes to jump right in and like, yep, let me go for this really intense emotional conversation? Or do you want to build on it? One group would say, well, you can't agree on the small things while you have the big underlying disagreement. Other one would say, well, you're not going to get to speak a language together of agreement unless you start building on small things. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not, I was 11 in 1984. So I was, listening to Van Halen and stuff like that and doing other things. So yeah, it's kind of funny. Like your conflict started, I was still in grade school. So yeah. I think so yeah, so there's a big problem. And again, like, then it kind of gets to the point where I would say, this might be a referral for therapy or counseling with like, well, you've got something about this person really rubs you the wrong way. What is that? And what is this doing to you internally? Because externally, I'm not seeing that kind of provocation. Like this is something, and again, like I'm not trained as a therapist. So I can ask the questions, but I can't guide them towards the answer the way that the therapist could or a counselor. So yeah, Alicia, how do you suggest them go? Basically, I would tell them it's a tool. Not the ombuds as a tool, but the conflict, it's a tool you can use. And the worst that would happen is you spent an hour or so talking with somebody about your issue and just being heard. The best that happens is you come out of there are some options. So there's no downside. It's totally confidential. No one else will find out. I can't tell anybody. I'm still waiting for people to come in and tell me stuff that's really ridiculous just to try to get a reaction out of me, knowing that I can't complain. Like, somebody's bringing their aquarium to work and they're doing whatever. They're bringing a reptile into the office or something, but nobody does that. But yeah, basically just tell them, look, I'm here to talk, just to be an outside resource, third party. So yeah, that's that. So we have this. So download that. I want to tell everybody. And any other questions? So thank you. So we're getting to that thank you point, which is where if we were in person, I would pick up on the verbal cues of people gathering their stuff and getting ready to leave. But I think the thank you is the Zoom version of that, which is great. And I love so I will also say thank you in several languages here. So thank you all very much. I love doing these, and it was really great to have you be part of this. And let me know what else you'd like to hear. So thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you, David. We greatly appreciate you. You are a Rebel Recharge rockstar presenter, and you're always welcome back. And your information is timely and spot on and much appreciated. So with that, I thank everyone for attending and joining us today. And we hope to see you back at another Rebel Recharge, our alumni engagement event in the very near future. Have a great weekend, everyone.